Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're diving deep into a specific and pretty significant government action. Executive Order 14168.
Right.
Its official title is Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. And it was signed on January 2025.
That's right. And for this deep dive, we've, pulled together a stack of sources to guide us.
What have we got?
We've got the official White House announcement, details compiled on Wikipedia, the actual text from the Federal Register, and various analyses related to, understanding policies like this one.
Okay, good. And our mission here is pretty clear, right? We want to give you a comprehensive, unbiased look at this executive order.
Exactly.
We'll break down its core details, try to understand its stated intent, straight from the source, explore the reported implications across the government, and cover the wide range of reactions it's generated. It's really all about shedding light on what this order does and says, based entirely on the documents we've looked at.
Think of us as your guides, kind of cutting through the policy jargon. We'll walk you through the specifics, the mandates, the definitions,
Right.
drawing directly from the factual content of the order and the reports about how it's been implemented and analyzed.
And I'll be trying to connect these policy points to the potential human impacts and maybe the broader societal context that the sources highlight,
Yeah.
but always staying neutral, focusing strictly on the information provided.
Yeah.
The goal here is for you, our listener, to come away with a much clearer picture of this particular executive action, why it's significant, and what its reported effects are.
So jumping right in, what's immediately striking is the stated purpose. It's laid out right there in the order's opening sections.
Okay.
The White House source presents the view that ideologues who deny the biological reality of sex, that's the phrase used, are enabling men to self-identify as women.
And access certain spaces.
Exactly. Accessing spaces traditionally designated for single sexes. It specifically mentions shelters and showers as examples.
And the language used is quite strong, isn't it? The order asserts this situation, fundamentally attacks women by depriving them of their dignity, safety, and well-being.
It does. It argues that what it terms the erasure of sex negatively impacts women. The American legal system, scientific inquiry, public safety, morale, even public trust in government.
So its position is more than just a social shift.
Right. The sources note the order claims this is a purposeful attack against the ordinary and long-standing use and understanding of biological and scientific terms.
Arguing that biological reality is being replaced.
Replaced by an internal, fluid, and subjective sense of self. That's the framing.
So based on that premise, what's the core policy direction?
The order states the administration will defend women's rights and protect freedom of conscience by using clear and accurate language and policies that recognize women are biologically female and men are biologically male.
Okay, clear and accurate language. That sounds like definitions are coming.
Precisely. And to ensure this clarity, Section 2 of the order provides very explicit definitions. These are intended to guide how sex-based federal laws and administration policies are interpreted from now on.
All right, let's look at these key definitions then as they appear in our sources.
First up, sex. It's defined as an immutable biological classification as either male or female.
Immutable biological classification.
And crucially, the order explicitly states that sex is not a synonym for and does not include gender identity.
Got it. A clear distinction there. And then the definitions for people.
Yeah, they follow from that. Women, woman, and girls, girl mean adult and juvenile human females, respectively.
Makes sense. And for men and boys.
Correspondingly, men, men, and boys, boy mean adult and juvenile human males, respectively.
Okay. Straightforward enough based on the initial definition of sex. What about female and male themselves?
Right, it defines those two. Female is defined as a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the large reproductive cell.
At conception, that seems specific.
Very specific. And male is defined similarly, a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the small reproductive cell.
Okay. The order also tackles gender ideology, you mentioned.
Yes. It describes this as the concept that replaces biological sex with a self-assessed gender identity.
And permits certain claims.
It says it permits the false claim that males can identify as and thus become women and vice versa, and requires institutions to regard this claim as true.
Right.
It also includes the idea of a vast spectrum of genders disconnected from one's sex. The order itself actually calls this concept internally inconsistent.
Internally inconsistent. Okay.
Yeah.
And finally, gender identity. How does the order define that?
It's defined as a fully internal and subjective sense of self, disconnected from biological reality and sex, and existing on an infinite continuum.
Disconnected from biological reality.
Yes. And the order states this does not provide a meaningful basis for identification and cannot be recognized as a replacement for sex.
Wow. Okay, those definitions really, they really lay the groundwork for the entire order, don't they?
Absolutely.
So with those definitions locked in place, the next big question is, what does the order actually require federal agencies and employees to do? Sections 3 through 7 seem to cover that.
Yes, exactly. The order mandates specific actions across the entire federal government. It's quite sweeping.
Like what? What's a core requirement?
A core requirement is enforcing laws governing sex-based rights and protections, but using the order's new definition.
Ones we just went through.
Yeah.
Sex, male, female, men, women, etc.
Correct. Using those specific definitions. Agencies must also use the term sex instead of gender in, well, applicable policies and documents.
And this extends to things like ID documents.
It does. Government-issued IDs like passports, visas, global entry cards, also personnel records, they're all required to reflect sex as defined by the order, not gender identity.
Okay. What else?
Agencies are told to identify and then remove any existing statements, policies, regulations, forms, communications, basically any messages that promote or otherwise inculcate gender ideology.
Identify and remove. And stop creating new ones.
And stop creating new ones, yes.
Yeah.
Forms requiring sex must offer only male or female options, not gender identity.
And funding. Was that mentioned?
Definitely. The order directs agencies to take steps to end federal funding of programs that are deemed to promote gender ideology.
The order also specifically mentions a Supreme Court case, right? Bostock.
Yes, Bostock v. Clayton County from 2020. This is a significant point.
What does it say about it?
While it addresses the prior administration's interpretation, that interpretation suggested Bostock required applying protections based on gender identity in sex-based spaces, like restrooms under Title IX.
And this order disagrees.
Strongly, it calls that interpretation legally untenable and claims, according to the order's text, that it has harmed women.
So what does it direct agencies to do about Bostock?
The Attorney General is instructed to issue new guidance to correct this supposed misapplication and to help agencies protect sex-based distinctions that are allowed by existing legal precedent.
Okay, so reinterpreting the scope of Bostock. What else on funding?
Agencies are also tasked with assessing their grant conditions, making sure federal funds aren't used, again, to promote gender ideology.
And there was something about Congress.
Yes, Section 6 required the president to present proposed bill text to Congress within 30 days. The idea being to potentially codify these definitions into actual law.
And agencies had a deadline to report back.
They did. 120 days to submit updates on how they were implementing the order. That includes changes to documents and any new requirements they'd impose on entities receiving federal funds.
And a big part was also getting rid of previous policies, right?
A very big part. The order immediately rescinded several previous executive orders. Sources list 1 through 988, 14,004, 1/2021, and 14-075.
And dissolved the White House Council.
And dissolved the White House Gender Policy Council, yes.
Wow. It also targeted specific guidance documents.
It required promptly rescinding numerous inconsistent guidance documents, things that have been issued by, say, the Department of Education and the EEOC under prior administrations.
Like what specifically? Did the sources give examples?
They do. Things like the White House Toolkit on Transgender Equality, various Department of Education toolkits and letters about LGBTQI+, trans, and intersex students, the previous Attorney General's memo regarding Bostock and Title IX, and the EEOC's harassment guidance, all specifically mentioned for rescission.
Okay, so with all those directives laid out, let's look at what our sources say happened after the order was signed. This is where, the rubber meets the road across the federal government.
Right.
And sources report that pretty quickly things started changing, like website content.
Yes, the implementation appears to have been swift in many areas. Sources report that within hours of the order being signed, mentions of LGBTQ+ resources and information began disappearing from federal websites.
Okay, hours. What about specific agencies?
Right.
Like the State Department?
For instance, the State Department reportedly suspended processing passport applications that requested sex marker changes.
Suspended them entirely.
That's what sources report. And took down relevant web pages. Existing passports weren't immediately affected, but renewing them would now fall under the new definition.
And travel advisories changed too.
Sources noted changes there, yeah. switching the language from LGBTQ plus to LGB. And there were reports of permanent visa bans and internal tracking codes like SWS-25 for travelers whose listed sex didn't match their assigned sex at birth.
Wow. Okay. What about health agencies? HHS, CDC.
We saw actions there, too. Sources say they ordered the retraction of unpublished research that used terms the order effectively banned, like gender, transgender, pregnant person.
Retracting unpublished research.
Yes, and references to transgender identity were removed from the CDC website. That included specific survey results, educational materials on supportive environments. Employees were also reportedly directed to remove pronouns from their email signatures. And the NIAID's HIV language guide, which advised on inclusive language, was removed.
And the Office on Women's Health.
They launched a new website, Protecting Women and Children. Sources note it defines sex based on reproductive function and prominently featured commentary from a conservative activist.
And the CDC stopped processing certain data.
The CDC announced it would stop processing transgender-related identity data, and the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, reportedly terminated hundreds of grants.
Why? What was the reason given?
Because they included targeted keywords related to LGBT people or gender identity in a biomedical research context. That flagged them under the new order.
Moving to education and housing. Any changes there?
Yes. The Department of Education altered the FSS student aid form. The non-binary sex option was removed.
Okay. And HUD housing.
HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, reportedly stopped enforcing a 2016 rule.
Which rule was that?
The equal access rule that protected individuals based on gender identity in housing and shelters. Sources state the goal was to allow women's shelters to exclude trans women.
Right. What about the Department of Interior, national parks?
Sources reported actions related to historical sites there. References to transgender people and transgender rights were removed from web pages for the Stonewall Monument and the Pauli Murray Monument.
Stonewall Bridge.
Really? Yes. And acronyms were changed from LGBTQ plus to LGB. Public access was also reportedly blocked to a biography of Pauli Murray that mentioned her pronouns.
This also reached independent agencies. They had to comply, too.
Yes, independent federal agencies were required to comply. Sources indicated the National Endowment for the Arts, the NEA, began requiring organizations getting funding to certify they weren't promoting gender ideology.
So impacting arts funding directly.
Right. And the National Science Foundation, NSF, reportedly compiled lists of keywords that would flag projects for review.
What kind of keywords?
Terms like gender, LGBT, women, those sorts of terms could trigger scrutiny.
Okay. NASA, EEOC, OPM, SSA. Any reported changes?
NASA reportedly took down LGBTQ plus employee resource pages and diversity info. Sources also mention verbal discouragement of displaying symbols related to gender identity. The EEOC, that's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, reportedly stopped investigating and started dismissing discrimination claims based on transgender status, both new and existing ones.
Dismissing existing claims.
That's what sources report. The Office of Personnel Management, OPM, required only male-female options on federal employee health insurance forms, and the Social Security Administration, SSA, removed gender identity pages from its website and stopped processing requests for gender marker changes.
Wow. It sounds incredibly far-reaching. Did it affect groups outside the government, too, like nonprofits getting federal money?
It seems so. Our sources reported that organizations like NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, removed references to trans people from their public materials.
Why would they do that?
Reportedly, to ensure compliance with the order's directives and maintain their federal funding.
Got it. Okay. So given the scale and the speed of these actions, it's clear the order triggered huge shifts.
Undeniably. Which brings us to the analysis and the scientific and legal perspectives that have been raised about the order's specific language and directives, as reported in our sources.
Yeah, what are people saying about those definitions, especially that at conception part?
Well, that drew a lot of attention. Some individuals mentioned in the sources, like the politician Sarah McBride, speculated about unexpected interpretations.
Like what?
Like, could the definition potentially suggest everyone is technically female based on initial cellular structures? Or maybe belonging to no sex? Or both? It raised questions.
Did anyone analyze that specific claim?
Yes. Snopes looked into the all-female claim and debunked it based on common biological understanding. However, they also pointed out that the definition's phrasing belonging, lacks clarity when you consider the complexities of early embryonic development.
How so?
Well, early on, Structures for both male and female reproductive tracts are present before hormones kick in, around 8 to 10 weeks, to direct development one way or the other. So, belonging to a sex at conception is biologically fuzzy, according to that analysis.
And scientists quoted in the sources had issues too,
Yes, they took issue with the at conception part more broadly, stating it gets the biology wrong.
because development takes time.
Exactly. They point out that the genetic signals for the gonads, the reproductive organs, don't really start stimulating their development until 8 to 10 weeks into gestation. That's quite a bit after conception.
Interesting. What about intersex people? Were they mentioned in the definitions?
Sources note they were not included or accounted for in the order's definitions. Individuals born with variations in sex characteristics.
And how did activists respond to that?
The omission prompted responses reported in the sources, with activists stating that the order attempts to negate our very existence.
There was also a perspective in the New York Times mentioned, a controversial one.
Yes, from the writer Masha Gessen. They argued that this order, especially when viewed alongside other related actions, constituted an effort to, quote, denationalize transgender people.
Denationalize?
Yes, drawing a parallel which itself sparked controversy to certain actions taken in 1930s Germany regarding citizenship and belonging.
Okay, a very strong claim there.
Yeah.
And circling back to the legal side, that interpretation of Bostock seems key.
It's a major focal point, yes. The order's stance that applying Bostock to gender identity in sex-based spaces is legally untenable and has harmed women.
Right.
That view sharply contrasts with the prior administration's stated position. They argued Bostock did extend sex-based protections in those spaces to include gender identity, so a direct conflict in interpretation.
So with such broad directives, these specific definitions and these points of analysis and disagreement,
Yeah.
it's probably no surprise the order faced legal challenges pretty quickly.
Not surprising at all. Our sources detail several lawsuits filed relatively soon after the order was signed.
Okay, let's talk about those. What areas were challenged first?
One key area involves prisons. A lawsuit called Moe v. Trump was filed
By whom?
by an incarcerated trans woman. The arguments made, as reported, include alleged violations of her due process rights, the Eighth Amendment cruel and unusual punishment,
Okay.
the Rehabilitation Act, which covers disability discrimination, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, or PREA, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA.
And what happened with that case?
Judges in separate related cases, Judge O'Toole Jr. and Judge Lamberth, have reportedly issued temporary restraining orders,
Blocking what?
blocking transfers of trans women to men's prisons and preventing the denial of hormone therapy in those specific cases. Those sources also reported concerns from advocates about forced transfers or solitary confinement still happening.
Okay, so challenges related to prisons. What else? Passports.
Passports, too, yes. The ACLU filed Or v. Trump.
And their arguments.
Reportedly, violations of the Administrative Procedure Act, APA, the First Amendment, due process, equal protection, and even the freedom of movement.
And the outcome so far.
Judge Kobik issued a preliminary injunction for 6 specific plaintiffs in that case.
An injunction means blocking the policy.
For those 6 individuals, yes, while the case proceeds, the judge reportedly cited animus and irrational prejudice against transgender Americans in the ruling.
Animus and irrational prejudice. Strong words from the judiciary there. What about the removal of documents from websites? Was that challenged?
That was also challenged. A lawsuit brought by Doctors for America led Judge Bates to issue a temporary restraining order, requiring the CDC, FDA, and HHS to restore web pages they had taken down.
So they had to put them back up.
Yes, but the sources note the agencies reportedly added disclaimers to the restored pages,
What kind of a disclaimer?
calling the information on them extremely inaccurate and disconnected from the immutable biological reality, basically echoing the language of the executive order itself.
Okay. Were there broader challenges, like civil rights challenges?
Yes. Federal lawsuits like National Urban League v. Trump and San Francisco AIDS Foundation v. Trump, these challenged this order and others.
Who brought those suits?
Coalitions of civil rights, LGBTQ+C, and HIV groups, represented by organizations like Lambda Legal and the Legal Defense Fund, LDF.
And what's their argument?
They challenge what they describe as attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and accessibility based on protected characteristics. So a broader scope.
Freedom of speech was mentioned, too, related to the arts funding.
Correct. The lawsuit, Rhode Island Latino Arts v. National Endowment for the Arts, filed by arts organizations represented by the ACLU.
Arguing what?
They argue that the NEA's requirement that funded projects can't promote gender ideology violates their First and Fifth Amendment rights, freedom of speech, and due process.
Okay. And finally, the federal funding aspect itself. Was that challenged directly?
Yes. Judge Lauren King reportedly blocked the part of the order aimed at cutting federal funding for programs promoting gender ideology more broadly.
And specifically, blocked funding cuts related to healthcare.
Specifically blocked withholding funds from health providers offering gender-affirming care to minors, according to the sources.
So as you can see, the order's directives have just rapidly led to significant legal pushback on multiple fronts.
Yeah, it's quite a list already. And beyond the courts, of course, reactions to the order have been robust and very varied, as detailed in our sources.
Right. Let's look first at some of the reactions reported in favor of the order. Who supported it?
Organizations like Focus on the Family were quoted. They said the order helps reestablish the exclusivity of two genders.
Okay.
Others. The American Family Association was reported praising it for acknowledging the truth. Alliance Defending Freedom, the conservative legal group, described it as a 180-degree turn back toward reality and common sense.
And were there feminist groups supporting it?
The Women's Liberation Front, or WOLF, which identifies as a radical feminist group, reportedly called it a major victory for women's rights.
Okay. Now, on the side against the order, what was the reaction there? It sounds like it was strong.
It was widespread condemnation from numerous feminist, LGBTQ+, and civil rights organizations. You know, the ACLU, Human Rights Campaign, Lambda Legal, NOW, the National Organization for Women, NCJW, National Council of Jewish Women, Kishet, Advancing Justice, many others.
And what kind of language did they use?
Sources reported descriptions ranging from extremist and packed with conspiratorial thinking to claims it was aimed at eradicating trans people from civic and public life. Others called it cruel, dangerous, and illegal, or seeking to erase federal recognition and harming our families and communities.
And they vowed action.
Many vowed legal action and pledged to fight back.
Did critics address the order's claims about biology or expert consensus?
Yes, the sources report critics asserting the order's claims and definitions are at odds with determinations of expert groups. They specifically mention the American Medical Association, which holds that gender identity exists on a spectrum.
And that letter from artists about the NEA funding.
Right. A letter signed by 463 artists was reported asking the NEA to roll back those restrictions on funding projects related to gender ideology.
What about reactions from politicians?
The Maryland Attorney General reportedly denounced the order quite strongly, stated it threatens people's lives, and vowed to fight to protect the rights of transgender residents in Maryland.
And internationally, what was the view from outside the U.S.?
Reactions were mixed, according to sources. In some parts of Africa, conservatives reportedly welcomed the order while activists condemned it.
Well, in Canada.
Canadian human rights groups reportedly called for an exemption to the safe third country agreement for transgender and non-binary asylum seekers,
Why?
citing this order as a reason they might face persecution if returned to the U.S. under that agreement.
So really, just a huge spectrum of responses
Yeah.
reflects how deeply polarized this topic is.
Absolutely. It touches on very fundamental issues for many people.
Okay, so to quickly recap what we've explored in this deep dive today, we started by identifying Executive Order 14168, its full title, when it was signed. We then dug into its stated purpose and core policy direction, including those really explicit definitions it provides for terms like sex, female, male, gender ideology, gender identity, taken right from Section 2.
We then covered the widespread directives the order issued. We detailed the key actions required across federal agencies and employees, updating documents, altering funding requirements, changing language.
Right.
We also looked at which previous executive orders and guidance documents were specifically rescinded. And we highlighted numerous report examples of how these directives were rapidly implemented across government departments, independent agencies, and even affecting federally funded non-governmental groups.
We then discussed the analysis and critiques raised regarding the order, touching on both the scientific perspectives like the at conception debate and the legal perspective.
Yeah, the exclusion of intersex people, that controversial denationalize argument, and those differing legal interpretations of the Bostock decision.
And finally, we summarized the significant legal challenges that have already been initiated against the order in areas spanning prisons, passports, document availability, civil rights, free speech, federal funding. quite a list.
And we presented the range of reactions reported in the sources, making sure to represent views both supporting and opposing the order from organizations, politicians, and internationally.
Yeah, this deep dive was really all about laying out the information directly from the sources as neutrally as possible so you can clearly see the specifics of this policy, see its reported impacts, the legal battles it's already facing, and the reactions it has prompted.
Right.
Understanding the details of executive orders like this one is really key, I think, to grasping significant shifts happening in government and how they can ripple out, across society.
It truly demonstrates how a single document attempting to redefine fundamental terms can lead to such swift, wide-ranging changes and, well, immediate challenges.
Absolutely. So as you consider all of this, here's a final thought to leave you with. Building on what we've seen in the sources, how might the ultimate outcomes of these multiple complex legal challenges, the ones already underway, how might they shape the future of this executive order's implementation?
Hmm.
And what does this whole process itself weigh? The executive branch issuing such a broad order and the judicial branch immediately weighing in through all these lawsuits. What does that reveal about the dynamic balance of power between the executive and judicial branches when significant policies face such strong, immediate legal opposition?